What happens when love arrives at the worst possible moment? Brian Hopper built an empire on cold logic and perfect timing, but the night he met Vivian Ola, every calculation failed. She was brilliant, beautiful, and wearing another man's ring. So he walked away, leaving behind only an anonymous $1 million donation and a heart that wouldn't forget. 6 months later, fate crashes them together again, but this time, he's the enemy threatening to destroy everything she's built. Caught between ambition and desire, duty and passion, they'll discover that some connections refuse to die. Sometimes the wrong timing becomes the right story. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. This is the second time around, a tale of second chances, stolen glances, and the courage to love when the world says you shouldn't. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Brian's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. The woman across the gallery had just thrown her head back in laughter, and the sound cut through the pretentious chatter of Chicago's elite like a melody he'd forgotten he knew. She stood before a massive canvas, her canvas, he realized, reading the placard, titled Waiting for Thunder. The painting showed a woman standing in a field of sunflowers under storm clouds that would never break, and something about the tension in those brushstrokes made his chest tight. He'd been to 100 galas like this. Written checks that made board members weep with gratitude. Smiled through speeches about community and legacy while planning his next acquisition. But this woman, with her emerald dress and natural hair styled in elegant twists, made him forget why he'd come. "You're staring, Hopper." His CFO, Marcus, appeared at his elbow with a knowing smirk. "That's Vivian Ola. She founded the Emoja Collective, the community art center this whole circus is funding. Tell me about her." Marcus raised an eyebrow. In 15 years of friendship, Brian had never asked about anyone at these events. Nigerian American. 30 years old. Got her MFA from the School of the Art Institute. She turned a failing community center in Bronzeville into something special: art classes for kids, gallery space for emerging artists, cultural programming. The place is magic, apparently, but it's hemorrhaging money. Brian watched as Vivian moved through the crowd, stopping to hug an elderly black woman in traditional African dress, then kneeling to compliment a little girl's braids. There was something unguarded in how she moved, as if she'd never learned to perform for rooms like this. "Introduce me." "Brian, she's not." "Introduce me, Marcus." 5 minutes later, Brian stood before her, and up close, she was even more devastating. Her eyes were the color of strong coffee, bright with intelligence and something else, a wariness that suggested she'd learned to protect herself. "Ms. Ola, this is Brian Hopper." "Brian, Vivian Ola." She extended her hand, and when their fingers touched, he felt it, that electric shock of recognition that happens maybe twice in a lifetime. From the way her eyes widened slightly, she felt it too. "Mr. Hopper. I've heard about you. The man who makes failing companies profitable again. Among other things." He smiled, releasing her hand before he did something stupid like hold it too long. "Though tonight, I'm just a man who's captivated by your work. Waiting for Thunder, it's extraordinary." Something shifted in her expression. Most people at these galas complimented her paintings in vague, meaningless terms. "You actually looked at it." "I couldn't look away. There's grief in those brushstrokes, but also defiance. Like you're daring the storm to break." "Sometimes the waiting is worse than the storm," she said quietly, then seemed to catch herself. "But you didn't come here to discuss my therapy sessions disguised as art." He laughed, genuinely surprised. "Actually, I came here because my publicist said I needed to be seen supporting the arts. I'm usually gone by now, writing a check and forgetting the cause. But your work, it makes me want to understand." "Understand what?" "Why someone would pour this much pain into beauty. What you're waiting for." The question hung between them, too intimate for strangers. Around them, the gala continued, clinking glasses, polite laughter, the string quartet playing something classical and safe. But in their small pocket of space, something real was happening. I'm waiting to believe that beautiful things can last, Vivian said finally. That they don't all end in destruction. Before Brian could respond, a young man in a server's uniform approached with a tray of canapés. Vivian thanked him in what sounded like Igbo, her whole face softening, and Brian felt a sharp longing to know her languages, her worlds, all the places he could never access. You speak Igbo? My parents made sure of it. They came here with nothing but refused to let us forget where we came from. She selected a canapé, examining it with amusement. Though I'm fairly certain this Nigerian-inspired appetizer would make my mother weep. That bad? Let's just say whoever made this thinks all African food is peanuts and heat. She popped it in her mouth anyway, making a face that was equal parts disgust and determination to be polite. But they're trying, which counts for something. Brian found himself grinning like an idiot. When was the last time someone had made him smile without calculation, without agenda? Tell me about the Emoja Collective. Marcus says it's special. Her eyes lit up, and he knew he'd asked the right question. For the next 20 minutes, she painted a picture of her vision, not with the rehearsed pitch she'd probably given to dozens of potential donors, but with raw passion. She told him about Mrs. Washington, 73 years old, who discovered she could paint and now sold her work at local markets. About teenagers who came in angry and left with purpose, their stories transformed into murals that covered the center's walls. About the African drum circle that met every Saturday and had become a healing space for veterans and trauma survivors. We're not just teaching art, she said, gesturing with hands that bore paint stains no amount of scrubbing had removed. We're teaching people that their stories matter. That their culture, their pain, their joy, all of it deserves to be seen and celebrated. It sounds like you're building a community. I'm trying. But communities need resources, and resources require money, and money requires convincing people like you, she gestured around the gallery, that we're worth investing in. You are. The certainty in his voice surprised them both. Vivian studied him with those penetrating eyes, and Brian had the unsettling sensation of being seen in a way he usually avoided. You don't know me, Mr. Hopper. You don't know if I'll waste your money or change the world. I know your art. I know your passion. And I know, he paused, choosing words carefully, I know what it looks like when someone has found their purpose. And what does your purpose look like? The question was gentle but probing. Beyond making money. No one asked him questions like this. In his world, worth was measured in quarterly earnings and acquisition victories. Purpose was a luxury for people who could afford to think beyond survival, even though he'd long since passed survival and entered the realm of excess. I don't know anymore, he admitted. I used to think I was building something meaningful. Now I think I'm just building. Before Vivian could respond, an older woman in brilliant purple approached, touching Vivian's arm with familiar affection. Baby girl, the mayor wants to meet you. This is your moment. Vivian's expression shifted, excitement mixed with nervous energy. Brian, this is Mama Adeyemi, my mentor, and the reason any of this exists. Mama, Brian Hopper. I know who he is. Mama Adeyemi's gaze was assessing but not unkind. The question is, does he know who you are? I'm beginning to, Brian said quietly. Something passed between the two women, a conversation in glances that excluded him entirely. Then Mama Adeyemi smiled. Come, Vivian. Let's not keep Mayor Thomas waiting. As Vivian turned to follow, her hand brushed Brian's arm, deliberate or accidental, he couldn't tell. Thank you for actually seeing the work, Mr. Hopper. Most people just see tax deductions. Brian. And you're welcome, though I should be thanking you. I haven't felt this awake in years. She smiled then, and it transformed her face from beautiful to luminous. Maybe we're both waiting for the same storm. Then she was gone, swept into the orbit of politicians and power brokers who wanted to be photographed with the evening's success story. Brian watched her navigate the crowd with grace he hadn't earned in 2 decades of these events, stopping to talk to everyone, not just the important ones, remembering names, asking questions that showed she actually cared about the answers. He was studying her across the room when the light caught her left hand, and his world tilted. The ring. Simple, elegant, an engagement ring that spoke of promises and forever. It sat on her finger like it belonged there, like it had always been there, and Brian felt something close to physical pain radiate through his chest. Of course she was engaged. Women like Vivian Ola, brilliant, beautiful, purposeful, didn't move through the world unclaimed. Some lucky man had won her heart, earned her love, convinced her that beautiful things could last. Marcus materialized beside him, following his gaze. "Ah. You noticed? I'm not blind. For what it's worth, I've never seen her with anyone. The ring's always there, but I've never heard mention of a fiancé. Maybe it's complicated. It's none of my business." Brian's voice came out harsher than intended. "I came to support the arts, remember? Mission accomplished." But even as he said it, he couldn't stop watching her. Couldn't stop cataloguing the way she tilted her head when she listened, really listened, to whoever was speaking. The way her hands moved when she talked about her work, painting pictures in the air. The way she'd looked at him, like she saw past the suit and the fortune to something real underneath. He left the gala an hour later without saying goodbye, his mind already calculating. By the time his driver pulled up to his Lincoln Park penthouse, he'd made a decision. He couldn't have Vivian Ola, she belonged to someone else, wore their promise on her finger like armor. But he could help her dream survive. At 2 a.m, alone in his home office with the city lights spread below him like fallen stars, Brian wrote an email to his foundation's director. The subject line read, "Anonymous donation, urgent." The amount, $1 million. The recipient, the Emoja Collective. The condition, complete anonymity. He hit send before he could reconsider, then poured himself a whiskey he didn't drink and stood at the window until dawn painted the sky the same color as Vivian's dress. Some storms, he thought, you walked away from. Not because you were strong, but because you knew you'd never survive them. The news broke 3 days later. Vivian was in the middle of teaching a watercolor class to a group of 8-year-olds when Mama Adeyemi burst through the door, phone in hand, tears streaming down her face. Someone donated $1 million. The paintbrush slipped from Vivian's fingers, spattering blue across the concrete floor. What? Anonymous. Came through this morning. $1 million. Mama Adeyemi laughed through her tears. Baby girl, you're saved. The collective is saved. The children erupted in confused cheers. They didn't understand money, but they understood joy. Vivian felt her knees go weak, catching herself on the table. For 18 months, she'd been drowning, watching the dream slip away dollar by dollar. The building needed repairs. The programs needed funding. The community needed hope. She'd been preparing to close, to admit defeat, to let down everyone who believed in her. And now, this. Who, she whispered. Who would do this? Does it matter? It's real. I checked with the bank 3 times. The money's there, unrestricted funding. Vivian, you can actually build what you've been dreaming about. Later that night, alone in her studio apartment in Hyde Park, Vivian stood before her easel and tried to work, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. The mysterious donation felt like a fairy tale, too perfect to trust. In her experience, beautiful things came with conditions, with prices that revealed themselves only after you'd already paid. Her phone buzzed with another congratulatory text, the 20th that day. But her mind kept returning to the gala, to a conversation with a man in an expensive suit who'd looked at her art like it meant something. Who'd asked questions nobody asked. Who'd made her feel, for 30 dangerous minutes, like maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd taught herself to be. She touched the ring on her left hand, a habit now, a touchstone. David had given it to her 3 weeks before the accident, on a beach in Michigan where they'd watched the sunset and planned a future that would never arrive. 2 years gone, and she still couldn't take it off. It felt like the last thread connecting her to the girl who'd believed in happy endings. I met someone tonight, she whispered to the empty room, to David's memory, to the universe that had taken him. And I can't stop thinking about him, and I hate myself for it. The apartment offered no answers. Outside, Chicago hummed with late-night energy, sirens, music, the rumble of the L train carrying strangers to unknown destinations. Vivian turned to her canvas, picked up her brush, and began to paint. She painted storm clouds that finally broke. She painted rain that nourished instead of destroyed. She painted a woman standing in that field of sunflowers, head tilted back, arms open, finally ready to get wet. She painted, though she didn't fully understand it yet, the beginning of letting go. 6 months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a lawyer in a suit that probably cost more than Vivian's monthly rent. She signed for it in the collective's new lobby. The $1 million donation had funded renovations that transformed the space from shabby to inspiring, and carried the envelope to her office with growing dread. Legal correspondence never brought good news. She was right. Dear Ms. Oler, the letter began, this notice serves as formal notification that the property located at 4127 South King Drive, currently housing the Emoja Collective, has been acquired by Hopper Development Group as part of the Bronzeville Renaissance Project. The words blurred. Acquired. Redevelopment. Eviction. 30 days. 30 days to dismantle everything she'd built. Vivian read the letter 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. The building's owner, elderly Mr. Peterson, had promised to give her first right of refusal if he ever sold. She'd trusted him. Trusted that her community would be protected. Hopper Development Group, she said aloud, testing the words. They tasted like ash. Hopper. The name triggered a memory she'd tried to forget, a man at a gala, eyes too blue, smile too knowing. She'd Googled him afterward, in a moment of weakness. Brian Hopper, billionaire investor, known for acquiring undervalued properties and flipping them for massive profits. Known for ruthless efficiency. Known for not caring who got displaced in the name of progress. She'd thought about him more than she'd wanted to admit over the past 6 months. Wondered if he'd ever thought about their conversation. Wondered why someone who seemed to understand her work would exist in a world so opposed to everything she valued. Now she knew. He'd been assessing her, calculating her value, planning his next acquisition. The gala hadn't been about connection, it had been reconnaissance. The anger hit her like a wave, hot and clarifying. She grabbed her phone, called the number on the letterhead, and demanded a meeting. The secretary tried to put her off, but Vivian had learned from Mama Adeyemi how to make herself unmissable. Tell Mr. Hopper that Vivian Oler will be in his office tomorrow at 9, and if he's not there, I'll camp in his lobby until he is. I'm sure his clients would love to hear about his community displacement project. There was a pause. I'll check his calendar. You do that. She hung up, hands shaking with fury and something else. Betrayal, maybe, though she had no right to feel betrayed by a stranger who'd made no promises. Except he had. He'd seen her work and called it extraordinary. He'd listened to her dreams and said she was worth investing in. He'd made her feel, for one dangerous evening, like maybe beautiful things could last. And now he was taking it all away. Vivian spent that night preparing, gathering documents, building her case. She researched the Bronzeville Renaissance Project and discovered it was massive, 12 blocks of redevelopment, luxury condos, high-end retail, all the markers of gentrification dressed up as community improvement. The residents being displaced were predominantly black and working class. The new residents would be predominantly white and wealthy. Same story, different decade. Chicago had been doing this to black neighborhoods forever. By the time she arrived at Hopper Development Group's downtown offices the next morning, she was a weapon. She dressed in her armor, a tailored navy suit Mama Adeyemi had insisted she buy for moments like this, her natural hair pulled into a sleek bun, minimal makeup except for the lipstick that made her feel powerful. She wore David's ring like a shield. The receptionist tried to smile. Ms. Oler? Mr. Hopper is ready for you. 42nd floor. Corner office. The elevator ride felt like preparation for battle. Vivian checked her reflection in the polished steel walls, straightened her shoulders, reminded herself that she'd survived worse than this. She'd survived grief. Survived loss. Survived watching her father work himself to death trying to give his children better lives. She could survive Brian Hopper. The elevator doors opened onto a floor that screamed wealth, marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than the collective's annual budget, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing Chicago spread out like a conquered kingdom. An assistant guided her down a hallway where every surface gleamed, then opened a door to an office that was somehow both ostentatious and tasteful. And there he was. Brian Hopper stood with his back to her, staring out at the city, hands in his pockets. He wore grey slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the uniform of men who wanted to appear casual while maintaining absolute control. When he turned, his expression was carefully neutral, but she saw the flash of recognition of something that might have been regret. "Ms. Oler. Thank you for coming. I didn't come to be thanked." Her voice came out colder than the March wind outside. "I came for answers." He gestured to the sitting area, leather chairs, coffee table with water and glasses already prepared. Playing the perfect host while planning to destroy her home. "Please, sit. I'll stand. This won't take long." Something flickered across his face. He'd expected her anger but maybe not her ice. "All right. Then I'll stand too." They faced each other across his expensive carpet, and Vivian was struck by how different he looked from her memory. The man at the gala had been charming, warm, seemingly genuine. This man was all business, walls rebuilt, whatever connection they'd shared thoroughly buried. Good. She could work with business. The Bronzeville Renaissance Project, she began, pulling the letter from her bag. 12 blocks of historically black neighborhood being converted into luxury housing that none of the current residents can afford. And right in the middle of your demolition plans is my community center. The one you seemed so impressed by 6 months ago. The Emoja Collective isn't slated for demolition. We're offering relocation assistance and... Relocation to where, exactly? Do you have any idea how long it took to build trust in that neighborhood? How many people we serve who won't follow us to some random new location because this is their home? You're not offering assistance, Mr. Hopper. You're offering a slower death. His jaw tightened. I understand you're upset. Upset? She laughed, sharp and bitter. Upset is when someone cuts you off in traffic. This is you erasing a community's heart for profit. Don't diminish it by calling it upset. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Explain to me how displacing hundreds of families and destroying a cultural hub is anything other than gentrification with a prettier name. Brian moved to his desk, pulled out a thick folder, and handed it to her. The full development plan. We're not just building luxury condos. 30% of the units are reserved for affordable housing. We're investing in local businesses, funding job training programs, creating community spaces. Community spaces that look like what? Like your lobby. Vivian gestured around them. Marble and chrome and nothing that reflects the actual community? Who are these spaces for, really? For everyone. Including the people already there. But how many of the people already there will be able to afford to stay? How many will be pushed out by rising property taxes and rent increases? You can dress it up however you want, but the math doesn't lie. They stared at each other, and Vivian watched him struggle with something, whether to argue or admit she was right, she couldn't tell. The silence stretched, loaded with everything unsaid between them. Finally, Brian sat on the edge of his desk, some of his corporate Polish cracking. You're not wrong. About any of it. Gentrification is real, and I'm not naive enough to pretend my developments don't contribute to it. But what's the alternative? Let neighborhoods decay? Allow crime and poverty to spread? I'm trying to do this responsibly. Responsibly? Vivian shook her head. You know what would be responsible? Asking the community what they actually need instead of deciding for them. Investing in existing residents instead of replacing them. But that doesn't make as much money, does it? It's not about money. It's always about money, Mr. Hopper. Don't insult my intelligence. Fine. His voice sharpened. It is about money. I run a business, not a charity. But it's also about vision. Bronzeville was once the heart of Black Chicago, the Black metropolis, full of culture and prosperity. It can be that again. It still is that. You're just not looking at the right things. Vivian stepped closer, her anger giving way to something more desperate. There's a barber shop on that block where men gather every Saturday morning. It's not just haircuts, it's therapy, mentorship, connection. There's Mrs. Johnson's soul food restaurant where she feeds people who can't always pay. There's the church that's been there for 90 years. These are the things that make a community, and they're the first things that disappear when people like you show up with your vision. Then help me. The word seemed to surprise him as much as her. You know that community. Tell me what they need. Be part of the solution instead of just opposing the problem. You want me to help you displace my own community. I want you to help me do this right. Or as right as possible. He ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment, he looked less like a billionaire developer and more like a man who'd lost his way. Look, I remember you, Vivian. From the Gala. I remember everything you said about community and culture and making space for stories that matter. I thought about that conversation more than I probably should have. So yes, when this project came across my desk and I saw the Emoji Collective was in the development zone, I thought about you. The admission landed between them like a confession. Vivian felt her certainty waver, which made her angrier. If you thought about me, you wouldn't be doing this. If I don't do this, someone else will. Someone who won't care about any of it, not the barbershop, not the restaurant, not your center. At least I'm trying. Trying isn't enough when people's homes are at stake. Then tell me what is enough. His frustration finally broke through. Tell me how to be the good guy in a system designed to reward exactly what you're accusing me of. Because I don't have those answers, but maybe you do. Vivian opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She'd come here ready for battle, for clear lines between right and wrong, hero and villain. But Brian Hopper wasn't playing the role she'd assigned him. He looked genuinely conflicted, genuinely lost, and that was somehow worse than if he'd been straightforwardly evil. I don't have answers either, she admitted quietly. But I know what you're doing is wrong, even if you have good intentions. The road to hell, Brian said with a bitter smile. Exactly. They stood in the wreckage of the conversation, neither sure how to proceed. Outside, Chicago continued its indifferent sprawl, a city built on displacement and reinvention, always eating itself and being reborn. The meeting is next week, Brian said finally. With the community board and city council. Come. Bring everyone from the Emoji Collective. Make your case publicly. I'll listen. You'll listen, but will you change your mind? I don't know. But I promise I'll listen with the same attention I gave your art that night. That's all I can offer. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was more than Vivian had expected, more than most developers would give. She tucked the folder under her arm, preparing to leave. At the door, she turned back. Why did you really come to the gala that night? Brian met her eyes, and for just a second, she saw the man from 6 months ago, the one who'd looked at her paintings like they mattered, who'd asked questions that cut through pretense. Honestly? I was bored. Empty. Going through motions. He paused. And then I saw your work, and I wasn't empty anymore. For 30 minutes, I remembered what it felt like to want something besides success. What did you want? The question hung in the air between them, too heavy, too honest. Brian's gaze dropped to her left hand, to the ring that marked her as unavailable, as someone else's. Something I couldn't have, he said quietly. Story of my life, really. Vivian felt heat rise in her chest, not anger this time, but something more dangerous. Recognition. Because she'd felt it too that night. That pull, that terrifying possibility of connection with someone completely wrong for her. She left without another word, riding the elevator back down to street level with her heart hammering against her ribs. The folder felt like a lead weight in her bag, full of plans and projections that would reshape her world whether she wanted them to or not. On the sidewalk, surrounded by lunch-hour crowds, Vivian pulled out her phone. Mama Adeyemi answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" "I don't know," Vivian admitted. "He's not what I expected." "Good or bad?" "Both." "Neither." "Complicated." She started walking toward the L station, needing movement, needing to process. "We have a week to prepare for the community meeting. Can you rally everyone?" "Baby girl, I already started. Half the neighborhood is ready to march on City Hall if needed." "Good. Because we're going to war." She hung up and kept walking, her mind already strategizing, planning, preparing for the fight of her life. But underneath the anger and determination, a small, traitorous part of her kept returning to Brian's office, to the way he'd looked at her, to the admission that he'd thought about her. To the terrifying realization that she'd thought about him too. If you're hooked on Vivian and Brian's story, hit that subscribe button now, things are about to get even more complicated. Part 2 coming next, where the real battle begins.